Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Hopefully you can all hear me and see the presentation on the shared screen just now. We'll just, because of the extra step to join, we might have a couple joining a bit later on. I have just popped in the chat box the link to access all the documents that we're going to be talking about today. So they've gone live just yesterday. So they're available to access from the GMCA webpage. There's no login needed. You just click on whichever one's relevant for you to download or access. I will say this session is being recorded, and this is also going to be another resource that's going to sit alongside the databases as well, just to kind of facilitate the use of them. So I hope that's okay with all our attendees just now. So I'm going to kick off in the interest of time. This is a kind of walkthrough of the databases, so it's not very interactive, so we're trying to keep it as short as possible, so hopefully we won't use up the full hour. I'm Sam Hartley. I work for business in the community. 100% of my time is on the Ignition project though, and I'm joined by Rachel Morrison, the Nature-Based Solutions Advisor from Greater Manchester Combined Authorities, also on the Ignition project. Me and Rachel created the evidence base, the initial evidence base starting in October last year. And in April, we had a webinar a lot of you will have come along to. That was after the initial research period. So it was a presentation of it and a kind of planning and getting feedback from the project team about how we go forward with it. So this is a kind of culmination of that. So in that was highlighted that we really needed to make the data available for everyone and make it accessible for all our project partners and further afield as well. So this is what we're doing today. And because it's quite a daunting resource with a lot of data in there, we thought it'd be best to have a walkthrough of the databases and the supporting resources as well. So I know we've got today a lot of our project partners on the call and the kind of wider interested parties in their organisation, but we also have similar projects in the UK and further afield who are looking at adaptation, nature-based solutions and investment as well. And we've got some of our friends from the UIA, our funders too. So what I'm going to do is a very quick 1-minute introduction to the project. I'm sorry for everyone who's heard that a million times. You can just tune out for that 1 minute, and a little description of how the evidence base fits in to that wider goal of the project. Then Rachel's going to talk through the methodology, so how we collated the information, what we included and didn't include, and some of the caveats on using it. Then I'll talk through some of the outputs, so the databases themselves, the headline findings report that's going to sit alongside it, and the user guide and the methodology report as well as some more resources. Then we're going to have a quick look at how the data can be used. Now you know how to use it, and then the future priorities for the evidence base and a quick Q&A session as well. So hopefully everyone can hear me. I've had no messages, so we're good to go. So the Ignition project aims to develop innovative financing solutions for investment in Greater Manchester's natural environment. This investment will help to build the city region's ability to adapt to the increasingly extreme impacts of climate change. So there's the 12 partners in the project seen at the bottom of the screen. We have funded by €4.5 million from the EU's Urban Innovative Actions Initiative. We started around October last year and we'll run to October next year with potential of it being a little bit longer than that. So 3-year project in total. We're based in Greater Manchester, but a lot of the work we do is applicable nationally and internationally as well. It's not just the localised mechanisms we're looking at. And the main focus is innovative financing solutions for nature-based solutions. So the evidence base came about because of the lack of investment in nature-based solutions and the kind of push to try and change that. It's a foundation of quantifiable benefits that allows identification for investment opportunities, and it sits under all the other the work that's going on within the project and the research around funding streams. It helps to identify who's benefiting how, and just gain a greater, wider understanding of how these nature-based solutions can perform and on what and where are their strengths and where can you play to those. So it sits underneath the project in that way. I'm going to hand over to Rachel to talk about how we collated all the information now.
Hi Sam, could we just change the display format slightly? I think it's showing up as notes and the presentation screen is therefore quite small. If it's possible to just rectify that. I've just had a quick note from someone.
Okay, 1 second. Is that better?
That's perfect. Yep, that's looking a lot better.
Fantastic.
Okay, hi everyone. Well, thank you for attending today's webinar and for joining us today. I think we've, like I said, we've run through some of the information that we've provided on the evidence-based project in the past. So I'm really just going to focus on why we did this and how we did it, and then we're going to do a real good run through of what's available for access as well. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, there is really a mountain of research papers, evidence reviews, tools available on the multiple benefits of green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. And I've just tried to illustrate a few examples of these on the slide to just give a picture to anyone who doesn't work on nature-based solutions, just the sheer sort of quantity of information that's available in this area. And this sort of strong body of evidence is, of course, a real sort of significant strength for the promotion of nature-based solutions and also green infrastructure. However, in seeking to understand and use this information at the sort of science policy interface, the sheer quantity of evidence across these multiple benefits can be quite overwhelming and sometimes hard to access due to academic paywalls, and therefore it can be difficult to translate it into a usable format to actually drive investment in nature-based solutions. So as part of the Ignition project, what we wanted to do was really to see whether we could increase the accessibility of evidence on the performance of nature-based solutions. This was both quite selfishly for our own use in the development of business cases for nature-based solutions, but we also saw it as a sort of opportunity to increase the accessibility of this evidence and therefore hopefully in turn increase the confidence in the performance of nature-based solutions of investors, and therefore increase uptake and increased installation of nature-based solutions. So we're doing it for sort of a dual purpose. And to achieve this sort of aim, we didn't just want to add another sort of report to the wealth of evidence already out there, but to do something a little bit different. We wanted to sort of create an evidence repository of knowledge on the performance of nature-based solutions, which could be used to sort of transparently report on performance, both within Ignition, but also could have sort of purposes beyond Ignition, and something with a bit more like longevity and potential to be used in different ways by different people. And well, that was really our aim and purpose. And as Sam has highlighted, the Ignition evidence base is now sort of available to use, and we hope that it's in a relatively simple format, and we hope to be able to update it over the future. I'm just going to run through a methodology now. If Sam, you could go on to the next slide.
Sorry, it's changing. It's just a little bit slow.
That's okay. Perfect. So like I said, our aspiration was to bring together some of this wealth of information out there on the performance of green infrastructure and on nature-based solutions. And but now I want to kind of talk through this slide what we did to try and achieve this. So to try and review and collate some of this sort of wealth of evidence on the performance of nature-based solutions, we conducted what we could broadly call a sort of a structured or semi-structured evidence review. We did it in quite a short period of time, so it's quite a rapid evidence review methodology as well. So to make sure we did a sort of a structured search rather than just sort of cherry picking the literature out there, we used a sort of common search terms to return information using common sort of academic and non-academic search engines such as Google Scholar. And we inputted in sort of common and consistent search terms, and then we systematically collated the evidence that these searches returned within databases. And it's these sort of databases are what we really refer to as the evidence base that we have available. For each of the sort of sources of evidence that we came across through our sort of structured search process, we systematically recorded these in the database using common terms. So there was a real range of sort of information in there and different types of sources, so including academic research, demonstration projects, technical reports and policy documents. But it was very much weighted towards academic research, as these were often sort of the origins between figures that you found in larger sort of literature reviews or policy documents or grey literature. So we often trace these back to the original sources for their inclusion in the evidence base. So once we'd undertaken this structured search for evidence, we'd recorded the evidence items that we came across systematically in the database. We then undertook a screening process, and the process of the screening these evidence items was really to try to make sure that they were the most relevant evidence in that database. So we prioritized. We didn't always exclude information, but we prioritized information that was from 2000 or after 2000 to make sure we got relatively up-to-date information. We also prioritized sort of urban information where possible. We also prioritized English evidence written in English, and quantitative evidence over qualitative. Although you will find qualitative evidence in the database, it is much more weighted towards the quantitative evidence. So the slide on your screen just shows a sort of visualization of the process that we've gone through. I've just picked out sort of some of the key steps in there: that structured search, the recording in a database, the screening of that evidence, and then that allowed us from recording in those databases to then synthesize some of that evidence within summary tables, which Sam's going to show you later when we look at some of these databases in detail. But it was a structured process that we went through, and we repeated that process across 5 different nature-based solution types. They're listed there at the side of your screen. So this was green walls, green roofs, green spaces, street trees, and sustainable urban drainage systems. And the benefit types we covered are those also listed on the screen there. So everything from air quality to land and property value uplift to noise mitigation and biodiversity. So I think that's sort of a very short sort of description of what we did in the methodology. We've got a detailed methodology paper that's available for you to download, and also a sort of brief 1-page summary table as well that just sort of runs through some of the key points and assumptions we've made in collating this data, so you can use it with sort of the best possible knowledge to hand. If you just flick on to the next slide, please. So we'll just run through briefly some of the caveats. So there are, of course, limitations and caveats attached to the methodology we've used. As I highlighted, we did a rapid review methodology, so we were very much capturing a large volume of data and trying to quickly store that as an evidence item in a database. And this really allowed us to collate a significant amount of data in a relatively simple format, but it will also sort of prioritize the easily accessible data, and that's a limitation that we recognize in this focus on quantitative over qualitative data. So that you'll see a lot in the database of these quantitative stats about the performance of nature-based solutions in terms of sort of runoff rates or carbon sequestered. Other sort of more nuanced evidence is less easy to capture within these databases. So that's a limitation very much to be aware of. It's although we've captured a lot of data in these databases, it's also still only likely to be a fraction of the research available. And as I've mentioned at the start, we're very much hoping this will be a live repository of knowledge and continue to be added to. So what you're seeing is kind of the start or the beginning of an evidence base for the future as well. So we've done significant legwork to get it to this place, but it can still go further over the next few years. As discussed, and we'll discuss this, I think, when we look at some of the data, there is an uneven distribution of evidence across the benefit types that reflects both trends in academic literature and areas of research, and also it reflects that focus on quantitative evidence. So in some areas, communication of benefits will be picked up much more easily in a rapid review. So for example, biodiversity in particular is not as well suited to quantitative evidence reported in this database, whereas others such as noise mitigation was very easy to include and to capture through the rapid review methodology. So that's just a limitation to be aware of. And Just also to highlight that we've included some summary tables in the database. These capture just a fraction of the information available in the databases, but provide a sort of quick summary for an introduction to the user. If someone just wants a quick idea of the performance of nature-based solutions, but they cannot reflect the entirety of the information in the database. So just to bear those in mind as we work through the databases now, that there are limitations around them, but they do capture a lot of information in a simple format. I'm now going to hand back over to Sam, who's going to take you through some of these results, the much more interesting bit, in a bit more detail.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. The slides are being a little bit lazy today. They're moving very slowly. So I'll wait for the next one to come up. So as Rachel's spoken about, we did the kind of rapid evidence review. That was over a 6-month period. And that gained over 1,000 evidence items. That was as of April. And then since then, obviously, work's gone on within the project and we've added some more. So the latest editions of the databases are June 2020 editions as well. So bear with me 1 second. Yep, so this is just a summary, over 1,000 evidence items across 5 urban nature-based solutions, as urban is a focus for the project, and across 12 different benefits from environmental, social, and economic as well. So what we've got available now, as of yesterday, on the ignitiongm.com website, which is actually at the moment, GMCA's main bio page for the Ignition project. They're all there to download. So we have the actual databases themselves. There are 5 of them, one for each of the MBS. So that is all of the data we've got. You can really get down into the detail of that as well. So to sit alongside that and support that and facilitate the use of them, we have the user guide, which is a 3-page overarching summary. It will basically be a condensed version of what we talk about today. We have the headlines finding report, which is an in-depth analysis of the findings with some interesting insights. Again, I'll talk about that shortly. And the methodology report, which is basically everything Rachel's just spoken about, and that's of interest for people who want to replicate the work and understand the process of how we've pulled it together as well. So the star of the show, the databases, as you can see, they aren't glamorous, they aren't a fancy online toolkit, they are simple, very large Excel databases that you can filter through easily and get right down into the nitty-gritty, and that's really what we wanted them for anyone to be able to get into them and see all the data we've got and filter it as to their needs. So I'm going to give a little profile of each of them now, just to give you an insight if you've got a particular interest in a particular MBS as well. So at the top there, you can see the Green Roofs database has got just over 156 evidence items. Sorry, just over 250 evidence items from 156 sources. To just speak on that distinction, so a source is one report. That one report might be looking at water quality. They might be measuring 3 different things. So they might be looking at total suspended solids, phosphates and everything. So we've pulled out each of those measurements and listed them individually in the databases, so that you can filter. If you are just interested in total suspended solids, you can filter for data on that. So it goes into that kind of level of depth. The classification chart just underneath that. So for each MBS, obviously there's different kinds, different techniques that can be used. For Green Roofs, it's split between extensive and intensive, and where the report has said what kind they've used, we've labelled it as that, and if it's labelled the actual depth of the substrate, we've labelled that as well. So at the bottom there, you've got a chart which displays the split of evidence against the benefits we were looking for. So you can see these are interesting in themselves. I'll give you an interesting insight into where the most evidenced benefit is. That's of good use in our project because we can then build funding models on where the most evidence is. But also it's an interesting insight into as just to how they perform in general. So here you can see we've got most evidence for green roofs on energy use, temperature and water quantity. So green walls, just under 200 evidence items from just over 100 sources. The split of the data there, you can see it's fairly well represented across all of the benefits we looked at, which is really cool. The most evidence being temperature, energy use and air quality. As Rachel said previously, we didn't get all the data out there on green walls, but this is just from our method, this is what the split looks like. So for the classification of green walls, it's a little bit more complicated than green roofs. You've got evidence ranging from things such as just a simple hedge to a kind of living wall, a green facade, and this is the classification we've included in the database as well. We don't have evidence on all of these different systems, but that we've just popped that in to kind of display the range, and hopefully we can fill that evidence in for these other techniques as well as the evidence base goes on. So the green spaces database is probably one of the larger ones, over 300 evidence items from 163 sources. The classification as well is quite varied, so it ranges from things like just urban parks to sports pitches to kind of roadside green verges, so you've got a real mix there. Again, you can see the data is well represented across all the benefits we were looking at, which is amazing. Health and well-being being the most evidenced, and this evidence, a lot of it reports on kind of contact with nature, time spent in nature, time looking at nature. So a lot of the health and well-being evidence can be pulled across to other nature-based solutions as well, where appropriate, obviously, because say for instance that there wasn't that much health and well-being evidence on a SUD, because that's too specific. But if it's a green space that people can access and be in, then if you look at the studies in there, you can pull those across as well. So there's also a lot of evidence for carbon and land and property value as well for green spaces, which is also really interesting. So sustainable drainage systems, we have got 143 items from 89 sources. As you can see, it's the least well represented across all the different benefits we looked at. Most of the evidence was on water quantity, quality, carbon, biodiversity. So that was an interesting aspect for us of pulling this together as well. The classification, again, there's a huge amount that you can put under a SUD. So we've split it into these 3 different classifications. So you've got storage facilities, filter strips and swales, and infiltration. And then you've got the sub techniques to the right of that as well. Again, we don't have data on all of these things. So for instance, sand filters and water butts is not something that our project is interested in. We need something with the green element to facilitate the kind of adaptation angle we've got as well. But again, that's somewhere the evidence base could grow. And then we've got finally street trees. So just under 200 evidence items from over 100 sources. The classification is split between kind of your just bog standard street tree and then your SUDS enabled street tree. There is significantly more data on your normal street tree than the SUDS one, but there is still, where possible, we found SUDS data as well. A really great split across all the benefit types. Most evidence on air quality, temperature, and water quality, and health and well-being as well. So that's also interesting in itself. So what I'm going to do now is just open an actual database and probably really clumsily share my screen and just flick into one. Hopefully you can see this. Rachel, could you confirm?
Yes, I can see that fine, thank you.
Amazing. Okay, so this is the database. These first 3 sheets are basically what I've taken you through there. It's a classification page, the evidence profile of what's in there currently, and then the summary page that Rachel is going to talk us through shortly. Another thing to note is the date of the edition. So this is the June 2020 edition. Obviously, as we get more data in, we'll update them periodically and amend online. So just make sure you're looking at the most recent one, or you're quoting, if you're using it as a reference, the most recent one. So let's go into, so following this first 3 sheets, everything else is, every benefit has got its own sheet. So let's take a look at air quality. Now, this is very daunting, the amount of data in here, but you can filter it how you like. So I'll just go through some of the aspects, the columns here. So the first 2, they're talking about the classification. So you can filter the types. So if you want to look at intensive green roofs, if you want to look at extensive, and sometimes the reports don't really detail the depth of the green roof, so we've had to put an unknown in there. And then the millimetre depth of the substrate, where possible, we've put this in. So say, for instance, this report had a range of green roofs that it was studying, so we've popped that in there. Next is the source. You've got the full reference and a link to access there as well. Next is the year. So if you wanted to look at more recent data, you can obviously filter it through that way. Next is the evidence type. So as we looked at a range of different kind of sources from academic studies, technical reports, demonstration projects, we've noted here what kind of resource that was, and again you can filter that. So the benefit pathway is a general description of what's happening, what is the benefit and how is it performing. Then physical flows in units, that's the good juicy stats. So you'll have the quantitative information in here if it's available. Then the next 3 slides, they are focused on kind of monetary translation of the benefit. When we started out doing the research, we hoped to find a lot on this because it would make the Ignition project a lot easier. But obviously it's lacking, and for most of the research, they don't take this and then translate it into a monetary benefit. But we do have some, and it is interesting where we've got these as well, so I would take a look at that. So next we have got the location. So if you were wanting to look at only studies from a similar climate to ours, you could filter through the country for that, or just in the UK. And I think if we have something from Manchester as well, we have specified that there. So if you're looking at very local level, you can do that. And then this final column is conditions and or limitations. So that's any caveats on the data, anything you should bear in mind if you're going to use that information. So for instance, this tab here, this data was taken from using software to gain an estimate. Some other insights would be, so this study was taken from a field study from just 2 green roofs. So it's little insights like that that might help you kind of understand the data a bit more before you go ahead and use it anywhere. And then the last thing on these sheets is that the benefit, the air quality obviously has a lot of different measurements underneath that. So we've kind of tried to put these under subheadings. So you've obviously got nitrogen dioxide there, sulfur dioxide there, particulate matter, and then some reports just report on general pollutant levels as well. So we've got these kind of more general reports here that will pull all of these different aspects together and provide one figure that obviously we couldn't pull apart. So they're included there. So that's a really quick run through of this. They all look exactly the same, obviously containing different elements, so carbon here. But yeah, that's a quick run through of those. And then the summary tab, Rachel's going to talk through, is a kind of pull through of all the information where possible.
Hi, yeah. So I think just to briefly explain the summary tab. Obviously, when we're putting this together, we appreciated that there was a huge quantity of information if you look through some of these different tabs, and the average user might not want to run through all of these different studies and so forth. So we created a bit of a summary table, and to try and give the user an impression of what might be the sort of anticipated performance of, say, a green roof. And it's shown there. Sam, if you could zoom in a little slightly, that would be very beneficial. So as you can see, if you just shift to the left a little bit, we've just sort of reflected on each of the different benefit types, and where possible, we've provided some summary figures. And these summary figures are, in a sense, a mean of a mean. So where average data has been provided in terms of average quantitative data within, say, water quantity, water quality, temperature, in terms of the performance of a green roof, and on a sort of a unit basis. So we've tried to use the most common unit we've used is meters squared, but sometimes units haven't been provided. But where that's provided, we've been able to take the average across some of this performance data and then input this into a summary table to produce a sort of a best guess on what might be your average performance based on a couple of these studies that we've done. In some cases, we've just provided a range because there's just range data available. In some cases, there's no data available in this case. We've also sometimes distinguished between different types of nature-based solutions as well. The ranges given here are the sort of the range in the average, so they show the highest and lowest average used, and that's what it's reporting on, not the full range that's displayed there. And we've also sort of included a little bit of some caveats there. So sometimes where there's only one evidence item, we've just put a little asterisk just to indicate where you would be only just using that one evidence item, just as a sort of warning. There's a limited data available here. You're just reporting on one figure, although this is a summary from an evidence base. So I think this is just important to know in terms of how you can use this information. There's also a column at the end there which just sort of gives a bit more context to some of the information that's been used to produce these sort of summary figures and the limitations that might be there, and some of a little bit of context where we've been able to around that information. So we're just hoping this will make it a bit more accessible for you guys to use and for sort of a quick use of the data. Of course, it's much better to go into the more extensive data that's available in the tabs, but this allows you to sort of quickly get an idea of what might be the performance of a particular nature-based solution against a particular benefit that you're looking at. So I think that goes through the summary tab, if that's okay, Sam?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Rachel. I'll pop back onto the presentation. Hopefully it will be the right way. No, it's not. Okay, that would be 1 sec. I'll switch this around. Okay, so I've just detailed some of the key things to remember that Rachel's just spoken about there in this slide. I will send these around afterwards with the rest of the resources and links and everything, so you'll have that. So that's the databases done. So onto the headline findings report, which I'd like to explain a little bit more and how it could be useful. So me and Rachel produced this report following the first initial research period in April. It's been updated with the new figures from all the new data that we added since then. In the report, you'll find the classification, the evidence profile, and the summary tables we've already talked about, but also includes a written summary of the evidence against each benefit. And so this is where you'll find kind of a more nuanced idea of what the data was like for that benefit, for that MBS, and get a bit more of a wider picture as well, rather than just looking at the stats, trolling through the evidence. You can get kind of our summary of our findings as well. So this is an extract from the carbon section for green walls. So I'll just read this out just to give you a little idea of what's in there. So a small number of studies were identified on the carbon sequestration and storage benefits of green walls in comparison to other nature-based solutions. Green walls have some capacity to sequester carbon annually, but the amount they could potentially sequester is thought to be less than that of green roofs. So it does give that more qualitative idea of what's going on with that benefit for that MBS. So for instance, another example of where this is particularly useful to read through is in the SUDS database on kind of temperature. We've only got, I think it's 4 articles or something, and you look at the summary thing and think, oh yeah, there's only 4 there mustn't be that much evidence, and you wouldn't really get the idea, because the evidence in the temperature for SUDS is that it actually increases temperature and enhances urban heat island effect because it stores heat in the day and releases it at night. So these are little insights that might be useful if you've got a particular interest. It's a large document. Obviously it goes through 12 benefits for 5 nature-based solutions, so you can obviously just look at whatever you're interested in as well and filter through. So how can the data be used? Obviously we're using it within the project continuously, and we're adding to the data and pulling it through our kind of financing research and funding stream research as well. But we thought we'd have a little think about how it would be useful for other organisations as well, and some of our partners, how they can take this, because this product is a product of the project that belongs to everybody. So how you can kind of run with this and use it. So for the data, you could calculate benefits at scale. So for instance, you've got an organisation who's planting X amount of trees as part of a net zero strategy or something like that. You can then calculate all these trees are planting, it would soak up this amount of rainfall, they'll reduce the surrounding air temperature by 3 degrees. You can really put together a case and have a better understanding of the impact of the action that's happening at scale. And because some of the data is per metre squared, you can really calculate that and build that up and get a greater picture of exactly what your intervention is doing as well for the other benefits. Another option would be to support installation proposals, business cases and funding bids. So again, that's kind of along the same vein of giving that wider picture of an installation. If you put a sud in, it's not just for water quality, it has these other elements around carbon, biodiversity. So you can really build the wider picture and really prop up your proposal with a lot of other benefits. Like if you were doing it for environmental reasons, you can prop it up with the social and the economic benefits as well, and vice versa. So another area would be to calculate the impact on specific communities. So for instance, if you're installing a sud for flood risk in an area that floods, obviously you'll be able to calculate an estimate of what percentage that sud will be able, rainfall will be able to soak up, and then you can calculate the reduction that will bring to the flooding area. Or say you, for instance, have a street of high air pollution. If you install X amount of trees or hedges or green screens, you can protect pedestrians from inhaling X amount of air pollution. And similarly, for the health and well-being stats, you could use this to kind of bolster any kind of social prescribing activities. So it's really kind of a pick and mix of do what you want with it. And then obviously communications and engagement. Everybody loves a good stat. You can take the stats, put them in your comms, you can create infographics with them, which is something we've already done. And then on engagement, you can really target the benefit. So if you're speaking to people who are particularly interested in kind of land and property or developers, you can pull out the land and property and the local economic growth stats and specific MBS and kind of get them interested that way. Or if you're speaking to community organisations, you can talk around the kind of amenity benefits and the crime rate reduction and the well-being that an intervention can bring. Similarly, if you're talking to organisations interested in nature, you can pull across the biodiversity stats that we've got in there as well. So it really is a kind of run with it, the kind of world is your oyster with it as well. So as we've been talking, you might have had a few ideas on how you could use this, and we would be really interested in your ideas, particularly obviously just for interest, but also to kind of map the impact of this piece of work, and kind of it would be good to feed this back to our funders and just kind of map where it goes. You don't have to answer this right now, obviously. A survey question will pop up at the end of the webinar in your browser, hopefully through GoToWebinar. And you might have already had an idea, you might have had an idea whilst we've been talking, or you might want to have a little think now. But I'd be really grateful if you just pop anything that's come to mind in that question at the end of the webinar. So
Sam, just a second. Could you just hide the participation sort of view, the GoToWebinar settings screen? Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, is that okay?
Yes, that's great now. Thank you.
Fab. Okay, so just to talk a little bit about what we're doing with the evidence base, obviously it's kind of supporting the research that's going on into funding streams as well, but we have a few more outputs as well. Just trying to change our slide. Yeah, there we go. So this is very near future. This is next week. Over summer, UK GBC, BITC and GMCA, all the acronyms, have been working on a report that translates the findings of the evidence base for businesses. So that's kind of putting it in a lens of how to satisfy sustainability goals and things like that. The title of the report is Nature-Based Solutions for the Climate Emergency, the Benefits to Business and Society. That is launching next Thursday alongside a webinar, so that is 2 till 3 next Thursday. I'll pop the link in the chat or in the follow-up email to sign up to that if you're interested. The audience is obviously building owners, managers, developers and businesses for that. We'll be continuing our work with the amazing Ignition Citizen Engagement Programme led by RHS Groundwork and City of Trees. So they've engaged with hundreds of citizens around the project. One of the aspects being a citizen survey where they kind of gain perceptions on green space. And what we've done is we've created this kind of infographic where we map what was said in the survey and what the actual data says, which is really interesting because a lot of the citizen focus was on health and well-being and less awareness around the more technical function of kind of water management and things like that. So that's a really exciting aspect of the evidence base. We're linking with the Ignition Living Lab build at the University of Salford, which just kicked off today, so this is very relevant. On that site, they'll be having interconnecting nature-based solutions, and they'll be monitoring performance for things like water quantity, quality as well. And they're having screens to display that and directly feeding that live data online as well. So we're hoping to link the evidence base with that. We're also, in the same vein as the business report, hoping to translate the evidence base for local authorities. This is a key stakeholder in our project, and we know there's huge scope and a lot of different departments that could use this in different ways. So in September, we will be starting consultation on this to try and make it the most useful report resource as possible, and hopefully we'll have something February next year for this audience. And obviously we'll be continuing to do the data updates as well. So we'll find data ourselves through our own research, but it would be really great if you come across anything to send it through to us, and we'll add it to our list, and then we'll upload it regularly and kind of update the databases, particularly if you found information in some of the areas where we've not got that strong data, or we have no data at the moment, or it's on a different kind of system that we haven't covered, say for instance sand filter suds. Yeah, anything is good. So if you do find anything, please do send it through. Okay, I think that is everything. And if you have any questions, you should be able to either raise your hand and unmute yourself. And if you can't unmute yourself, I think I should be able to. Just whilst you're thinking of any questions, I will send a full email around with the links to everything I've mentioned here as well. And do just download some of the databases and have a look around yourselves and get kind of used to looking in them and looking at what data is there, and have a think about how you could weave that into the work you're doing as well. Okay, so if we have, I can't see any hands raised just now. You can also type a message to me in the chat function at the side as well if you weren't able to unmute. Oh, I think we've got Birgit, our UIA advisor, and I think I can try and unmute you here.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation and all the work done. And I think it's a really, really great tool, having all the information in one place. I just wonder, we probably argue that it is better to use nature-based solutions versus grey solutions, at least in some cases. And could you somehow put these nature-based solutions in relation to grey or technological solutions that could show the benefit of nature-based solutions? Or where are nature-based solutions highly effective and where they are maybe only moderately effective, things like that, just to enable a better choice for nature-based solutions or for other solutions?
That's a really interesting point, and something we have looked at, not in a kind of comparison for performance. We took some of the evidence and kind of worked it into a cost benefit analysis tool on green roofs, particularly, that Rachel's leading on. Rachel, I don't know if you want to answer anything more on that.
Yeah, I think it would have been something that we'd love to do, and we sort of struggled to fit it into the format that we were using. In some cases, it was easy to do, where there was a sort of stat for bare ground, or for sort of just a normal roof, for example. But another technological solution, so a sort of grey solution rather than a SUD, in terms of a storage tank or something, we weren't able to go as far as that within this, and it would be, it'd be interesting to explore ideas of how we could better use that and do that in the future. So for the green roofs case, we've taken the information contained in the databases, and looked at some of the sort of replacement costs around an average roof, as well as looking at the performance of installing a sort of a green roof, and compared and contrasted these different things and the different values in terms of insulation. And I think maybe one way to do this would be to reflect on that case study and really see what changes could be made in the future to the databases to adapt that information and take that forward. So yeah, thanks for the question. I think that's definitely something to be keen to include, and we weren't able to do that in this first go round.
Yeah, thank you. So I think it's not an easy task. I'm fully aware of that, but just a matter of presenting, how to present that database and all the evidence there. So maybe something could be done, but yeah, I know it's difficult.
Thank you, Birgit. I think we've got a few more questions. So Ashley Holt, I think I can unmute you just now. You've got your hands raised.
Hi there. It's not so much a question, it's just something which might be worth, I suggest might be worth thinking about. Recently, I saw some presentation on integrated constructed wetlands from Cranfield University, where they've taken information on integrated constructed wetlands for various kinds of wastewater treatment around the world. And what was very, very clear from the evidence collation was that it wasn't really possible to draw any kind of single conclusion about an integrated constructed wetland, because they're all very context specific. And I think there's great strength in having a database, but my feeling about nature-based solutions is that there's a couple of other things. I noticed you use some of the information from our local action project there. And one of the things we emphasize in the local action project is the opportunity mapping. So it's where it's possible to use it. So you can't just blanket use NBS. It's where it's possible to use it. But also with some nature-based solutions, perhaps less so in an urban context, but for example, if you're going to get in a rural context, if you're going to get the benefits from a hedge for a whole range of things, it needs to go along the contour of the slope, not across, not down the slope. And so it strikes me that for things like green walls and things like that, there are other factors that one needs to maybe think about in terms of what optimizing their performance actually is. So it's not something you can easily necessarily put into a database. But I think, I wonder if there's some way to sort of add those kind of qualifications in, because just having, for example, the idea that you can simply add everything up, and you provide this many square meters of a green solution and you've reached it, I don't think necessarily reflects the way that we have to think about their use. And I'm just wondering whether there's something that we can do about the context around their use as part of an overall risk management tool, which is what they are. This is a great tool for the kind of basic info, but then we need to sort of contextualize it a little bit more. And I'm just wondering how we could do that to make it even more useful.
Yeah, I definitely think we need to bear in mind all of that contextual information while installing nature-based solutions. This database very much takes a performance reporting perspective. So we have contained some information on sort of the design of that nature-based solution, for example, the depth of a green roof, but many other factors that you're talking about won't have been captured in that information. So I think it would definitely be a priority to link it in with more contextual information. There's a lot of design guides and reports around green infrastructure and nature-based solutions already available that in the first instance we can provide links in, or like I said, we can add in further information to the table to try and capture some of these limitations at the start. So different benefit types are going to be more conditional. Carbon, for example, might not be as conditional as noise, and these sorts of different factors to reflect that. So yeah, at the moment we're just wanting to get the data out there, but definitely that's something that we need to be aware of, and it'd be great to follow up with you on how we can best do that based on your experience.
That's great, thank you. We could add a new sheet in. I don't think there's enough sheets in them. It needs more. I think we have Dave Ballard, did you have your hands raised?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I think it's great work. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's great work. I was just wondering, how do we update it and keep it relevant? So we're at the cutting edge of new research and new studies as it comes along. And a second question, if I could, is how do we increase it to more MBS beyond the 5?
Yeah, so we very much picked the 5 we thought we could feasibly tackle within 6 months, and we were hoping that additional information coming in would allow us to update for sort of different MBS types, as we've got to fit within the sort of the remit of ignition. So at the moment we've got a very simple strategy, which is just an email address which we'll be monitoring, and then it's periodically adding in information to the databases and then updating them. But we're hoping to get a more sophisticated situation in the future. There's a couple of constraints about this. We were hoping to have a sort of form that you could input your data in on a web page, and that hasn't quite been possible. But we're in the process of getting a new website being developed at the moment, so we're exploring the functionality of that. So I may just have to report back to you on exactly how, but at the moment it is just that sort of email address that we've got, but we are hoping to have some sort of user fill-in form hopefully in the future, fingers crossed.
I suppose it's just making sure that it can be policed, so that the data that we put on there is, has got solid set criteria to ensure that it's robust and it's relevant.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks very much.
No problem.
Thanks,
That's certainly something we'll kind of work into the kind of strategy for updating it as well. And also, obviously, Ignition's quite a short project. It will end soon, and we are in talks with the University of Salford, who will maybe continue to host it after Ignition's lifetime, and that will kind of sit nicely with their the MBS on site and the monitoring of that as well. So hopefully, it will live on beyond Ignition.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
No problem. I'm just checking if anybody else has got a hands raised. I think that's everyone. So we'll give you 8 minutes back, which is great. We hope to finish a bit early. We hope it wasn't too dry, but hopefully that's given you a little insight into how to use them and given you a little inspiration as to kind of how to run with this data. Do contact us if you kind of want any help with it. This webinar will be available on our YouTube playlist as well, so I'll send that around once it's up. You can send to anybody who hasn't been able to come along today. But thank you all for coming along, and hopefully we'll speak to you soon. And maybe I'll see you next week on the launch report for the business report.
Thanks, everyone.